Now we're going to talk about tubular instruments, and I'm actually going to introduce a third class. So we had tubular instruments closed on one end, we had tubular instruments open on both ends. I'm going to add in conical instruments. And I didn't do this before just because I was trying to keep it simple. But we're going to talk about conical instruments because reality is trumpets, trombones, saxophones fall under conical instruments, not tubular instruments closed on one end. So we're kind of adding a little bit to what we were doing. Um, the math in this section is pretty straightforward, pretty, just a matter of applying what you know already, adding in conical instruments, and moving on from there. All right, so how are conical instruments different from these two? Well, conical instruments are actually closed on one end, but the cone shape makes them act like they're half wave instruments, which are open on both ends, rather than quarter wave instruments, which are closed on one end, right? And so conical instruments actually look like go as half wavelengths rather than a quarter wavelength. And then open on both ends, of course, is a half wavelength. And frequency, of course, is still wave velocity divided by wavelength. Um, so conical instruments, those are brass instruments with valves, um, valves and slides. Valves are used to change the length of the instrument, right? So in a trumpet, with all the valves open or like this, open is the up position. The air actually just goes through here, straight through all the valves to here and out. That is the shortest distance you can get on the trumpet. Right? And when you press valves, you press this middle valve, that diverts it through this little bitty piece here. Press the third valve, it diverts it through that piece. Press the first valve, it diverts it through this piece. And so these different valves send things through different regions, pardon me, of the trumpet. Um, Trombones can also be valved. There's your simple trombone that's just a slide. There are other trombones where you can have valves that give you a different length by adding in other pieces. And then of course saxophones, which are conical, clearly conical, they have all of these um, pads that you trigger to open or close them, depending on what length you need on this. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to instruments with holes in them. Um, then woodwind, cylinders closed on one end, your oboe, your clarinet, your bassoon. These are basically a cylinder that's all one size. There's a little bit of flare on the bell, of course, but basically a cylinder of one size. And you get different notes by opening and closing the, the holes in the tube and by overblowing. Overblowing, of course, also on the brass instruments. Um, and the higher you go in energy, the higher you go in frequency, the more energy it takes. And then there are flutes, right? Flutes, like your woodwinds, closed on one end, they're open on both ends, and you use these holes to basically change the length of the flute. And there are all kinds of flutes out there. The ones you're probably most familiar with, the standard flute and the piccolo flute, but there are flutes out there that take several people to carry. They're just enormous. Um, and I really like the sound of some of those. And, just for reference, you still have our scale here.